I'm Dave Breakenridge, and this is Under the Dome. As the province moves through the stages of its Open for Summer plan, a new survey shows Premier Jason Kenney has lost the confidence of Albertans when it comes to his handling of the pandemic and even the vaccine rollout. That same survey shows that the UCP is trailing the NDP by about 12 points, and half of Albertans say they'd like to see Premier Jason Kenney resign. But what's driving that slump? And is there anything the Premier can do to turn those numbers around? That and more on today's episode. My guest today, Edmonton Journal columnist David Staples, Edmonton Sun columnist Lorne Gunter. Thanks for being with me here, guys. We've got a lot to get to today as it is a busy time in Alberta politics. We're in the middle of Alberta's reopening strategy. We're kind of almost through the third wave of the pandemic, or it looks like the third wave is ending in the pandemic. And we're going to talk about some polling that shows Jason Kenney and the UCP not sitting pretty with a lot of Albertans. But first off, we're going to talk about the reopening strategy. Jason Kenney announced it last week. We were talking about 3 stages. Stage 1, which we're in right now. Stage 2, which we'll possibly get to on June 10th. And Stage 3, which we could get to before Canada Day weekend. Now, these are tied to hospitalization rates and the amount of people who have been vaccinated. First up, David, what do you make of this reopening strategy? There's been a lot of talk that it's too fast. It's faster than any other province. And there are others who say, well, you know, we're on a good track right now. What was your thought on the reopening strategy that was announced last week?
I think it was extremely sharp politics, Dave. If you're gonna, if you want to get attention and you want to kind of change change the frequency on how people are taking in your message, I think you need to do something bold. And being first in reopening for the major provinces in Canada, that's bold. You had to know that some people are not going to like that. But what we've seen in the United States is that places that have been reopened have been fine. They've had their cases continue to go down. Texas opened up. They probably had about 15% first doses and 30 to 40% acquired immunity, herd immunity from getting COVID. They've been fine. Their numbers have crashed all across the United States. The New York Times has a story today saying since the mask mandate came off, they've had continued drops in cases, just like before the mask mandate was on, the CDC's mask mandate. It seems like the vaccines are just kicking butt on the virus, that it's the safe thing to do. Dina Hinshaw confirmed that this is all based on what they're seeing in other jurisdictions. This is going to be fine. Looks like everything aligned. So for him to come out first, especially when Ontario is really hesitant, other places are far more hesitant. He needed to do something bold, and he's done so. And he particularly needed to do that because his own party has actually been pretty much shredded by this COVID pandemic and his government's response to it. It's been a very difficult policy issue for people on the right to deal with, and there's been incredible dissension within his ranks.
Now, Lorne, looking at that, the idea that as David said, his party has been shredded by this, both internally and from the outside. You know, we've talked a lot on this particular show about this balancing act that Jason Kenney has had to do to try and appease people who don't want reopenings or want tougher restrictions, and then people with his own party who say, we've had enough of this, we want things to reopen. I get the sense he's kind of leaning more towards the people within his own party that say, look, enough of this. We need to reopen. We're vaccinating more people now. We've got to look at getting out of restriction time. Do you get the sense that that's who he was looking at more when he was talking about let's reopen by Canada Day? Yeah. Let's have a Calgary Stampede.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the shredding or the split is within his own party. I mean, the balancing act is among UCP members. It is still not a monolithic party. I mean, it's still a lot of the old Wild Rose element. There's still some of the old Tory element. But what you have is sort of an urban party and a rural party. And the rural party has felt since the beginning that this was an urban pandemic. This was an urban problem. They were wrong in thinking that. Now, as you know, I've written several times about how the rates of infection in some of the rural areas are even higher than they are in the urban areas. The numbers are big in Edmonton and Calgary, but the populations are much, much larger. So you have to look at the rate. How many, what percentage of the people have the infection. And it was funny when some of the rural MLAs were complaining the loudest in April. They had, and I'm sure they didn't know this, they had communities within their own constituencies that had the highest infection rates in the province. But they know no one who's come to their constituency office or called in who has had it, and people phone in and say, well, yeah, okay, those people down the road had it, but I don't know anybody. That's just Edmonton and Calgary thing. And it wasn't. And unfortunately, I think that Jason's biggest single problem, Kenny's biggest single problem in all of this has been that he has not been a great communicator. He did at one point, just before he made the reopening announcement, spend an afternoon's press conference going through all the numbers and showing that there are more people in ICU as a percentage of the population in rural Alberta than there were in the cities. He spent some time talking about rural infection rates and showing why that mattered. He hadn't done any of that for the first 12 or 13 months of the pandemic. And I think the numbers may bore people, but they're worthy of going through because they put it into perspective. And I just don't think that he has done enough of the retail politicking that he needed to do, that he was able to do even with Zoom and Skype and Facebook. I don't think he's done that. And I think that's what has led to to what David calls the shredding.
Yeah, I mean, on the idea of reopening and the idea that he's kind of fighting this battle within his own party, and we're going to get to some more details about this Leger survey that Postmedia had this week. One of the questions in there was asking, do you want to see all the restrictions lifted now? And if you look at the poll, it's something like 69% of the people don't want to see all the restrictions lifted now. And then 30 some odd people say, no, we want to see the restrictions lifted now. And I assume that there might be some cross-pollination between parties. Some UCP supporters don't want to see all the restrictions lifted now. Whatever
people say in the polls, Dave, it doesn't really matter. What matters is getting it right. And if he gets this policy right, if Alberta reopens, and this isn't just him, it's Hinshaw, it's clearly Hinshaw's policy as well. If they get this policy right, they'll get the credit for it. Listen, Kenney was listening to the libertarian wing of his party more in the fall, and he was more hesitant to put in measures. And you could hear it in his rhetoric. And I think it just hit him square in the face. People died because of that. They got the balance wrong. He's been trying to get this middle ground balance all the way along. And then suddenly it occurred to you, like, square in the face. Okay, we got the balance wrong, and there's more people in ICU, and there's more people dying because we got the balance wrong. He made the decision then that's not happening again. It was incredibly politically unpopular because he got it wrong in that moment. And he paid a political price. Now he's got to get it right. And if he gets it right, whatever people's fears are, it doesn't matter, because when you get it right, when the hospitalizations go down, when the case counts go down, and you're able to, then there's real harm in lockdown. And when you can end that, he's going to get the benefit of that, because people say, oh, he got it right this time, and the hospitals aren't packed and we can live our normal lives. There's going to be a memory that people will have. Oh, Kenney said this would happen, and it happened. And he might get some uptick in his popularity because of it. And I think that the NDP has been playing. It's been interesting to see the NDP's reaction in the legislature, because initially Rachel Notley was portraying it as a bad thing to reopen. She was portraying, like, in Quebec, they're not opening till the end of summer. In BC, it's not until then. And look at what you're doing. You're rushing ahead. That was a big political mistake early on, and their initial response was to create more fear. I think that's personally, I think it's out of step with the science, with what's going to happen, and public mood's going to follow that, because when Kenney's proven right, that'll even be further in people's heads that he was right on this, in this final stage. He didn't get it right all along, but in the final stage he did. So I think that's what's key for him, is to have the right policy and to follow through on it, and see where he'll reap the rewards or the negativity, depending on how it turns out.
Mm-hmm. Lorne, what do you make of the idea that Albertans don't feel he's doing well on those items like communication and managing the pandemic, and even on the vaccine rollout?
Well, it's funny. I've forgotten now the source of the poll, but about a month ago, there was a poll of each of the provinces, and what do you think your provincial government has done? Has it had enough restrictions, not enough restrictions, or just about right? We had the tiniest sliver of any province in the just about right, and the highest. There were way too many restrictions, despite the fact that we had probably the fewest restrictions of any province almost all the way through this. I mean, even a month ago when they announced we were going back into the original lockdown from May of 2020, we still didn't have the kind of restrictions that Quebec had. A curfew until last week. Ontario still has most small retail shut down, stay at home order. We didn't have any of that, but we felt that we'd been locked down. And so that's a really hard thing to get right. But the other thing is, I think that with the new announcement, you just get a sense from people that they think it's almost over, that they'll wait till the end of this month and then they're going to stop worrying about as of the 10th, can I have 11 people in my house if one has a foot in the door and one has a foot out the door? Do I get to go to the mall without waiting? Can I put my mask on only over one nostril? They're ignoring all that. They're sort of basically saying, look, I'm going to do what I feel like within reason for the next month. After that, I'm burning the damn mask, and we're free.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say we're just a little under 2 years away from our next election. So horse race polls are more a snapshot in time than anything. But obviously, the feelings about Jason Kenney's handling the pandemic have hurt where his party sits in the poll. And we're looking at like kind of the mid to high 30s for the NDP in popular support, whereas the UCP are in the mid 20s. And then further down in that Leger poll, about half the people feel that Jason Kenney should resign. Where does this put the Premier in terms of, needing to really turn things around, Lorne? Or what does he need to do to turn things around for himself?
He needs to get back in the blue pickup truck. And when this is over, he really does. I remember in 93, after the first round of big cuts by the Klein government, Ralph got a cell phone, which at the time was the size of a shoebox. Didn't work in most of the province, but he got the cell phone, an RV, and Colleen, his wife, and one assistant. And they got in that RV and they drove all over the province. The assistant did most of the driving. Ralph would hop out at a diner, at a cattle auction. I remember one time following through a mall in Fort Saskatchewan. And he just glad-handed with people. He talked to people. He got out and showed. Now, Jason Kenney is not Ralph Klein. He's not going to have that kind of street politician charm. But he did really well when he was trying to unite the two right-of-center parties by driving around in that blue pickup truck, talking to people in small groups, going to all sorts of events, and just being human. And that's what he needs to be able to do again this time. It also helps. For instance, there was a good sign yesterday in the economy, not a great sign, but the Canadian Investment Agents Association has re-upped Alberta's attractiveness to oil and gas investors. So, we're starting slowly to come out of the economic downturn too. I mean, you guys remember, these guys have been hit by three big bundles of bricks: the pandemic, the economy, and the personal popularity division type of thing. That's an awful lot for any party to handle. And I think only time will heal any of that and get them back on there. But I do think Kenney has to spend a lot of time flipping pancakes, shaking hands, maybe sitting at events that he doesn't really. I don't know whether he's a rodeo fan or not. I've known him for a long time. I don't know whether he likes rodeo, but he needs to go to a rodeo now and then. He needs to be booed at by the crowd and laugh it off and win them over. There's nothing but the hard work of retail politics that's going to get him and his party back on top. But the good news for them is that despite all of their collapse, the NDP is only 3 percentage points above where they were in the election in 2019 that they lost. So this has not really benefited the NDP. It's solidified the NDP base. I think that 36% they got in the Leger poll is as strong at 36% as they've ever seen. But they did not get huge pickups among swing voters. The undecideds have rocketed up. And that's where the UCP's hope comes from.
Yeah. Now, lastly, a bit of good news in Alberta after, much talk, seeing other provinces roll out their second dose plan for COVID-19 vaccines. Jason Kenney, Dr. Hinshaw, Health Minister Tyler Shandro introduced Alberta's second dose plan. I know that the reopening was based just on the 70% of 12 and over with a first dose. How important is it to the reopening that we have second doses kind of rolling out? And how important is it for Jason Kenney to get that rolling out? Is he going to vaccinate his way back into everybody's hearts, David?
Well, the most important thing in the pandemic, the goal of the pandemic management is always avoid a public health crisis. How do you do that? Well, if your most vulnerable people are protected, then you avoid, the rampant hospitalization and ICU rates. So what we have already is, I think it was, Kenny said 74% of people over 75 have their second dose. It's just in terms of doing the right thing, the right and humane thing, the safer we can make our most vulnerable people, that's the best plan to have before reopening. And it looks like we're going to get there. I think it's 10% now in Alberta that have had 2 doses. We'll soon be getting to 20%, 30%. By the time of full reopening, what we'll be at for second doses, 40, 50% maybe. So this is really important in giving people who are most worried about the virus a great sense of security, a safety blanket. And so it's crucial, and it's great news for Alberta. I don't know how we can be so far ahead of other provinces on this. Maybe I think it's because we have a younger population, so we're able to get to people quicker with the second dose. But it's a big part of the reopening plan.
Lorne, how important is it to the kind of the optimism in the province that we get this second dose rollout as quickly as Jason Kenney's hoping that we do?
Well, I think it's somewhat important, but I think even the first dose has changed the mood in the province to the point where a lot of people are quite happy that the reopening's been announced, that we've got another month left, a little bit less than a month left in restrictions, and the second dose has not been as psychologically important. I'm happy to see as many people showing up and as many people getting ready to book appointments for second doses, because what they found in a lot of jurisdictions in the United States, Texas is one of them, is that once you got the first dose in people and the infection rates fell through the floor, people didn't show up for their second shots because they didn't think it was that important anymore. And so, I think we're a little more upright than that in Canada and in Alberta, despite this large freedom-loving group we've been talking about. So I think people are going to show up a lot of people are going to show up for their second shots. Tell me when. I'll be there. I'll get my second one as soon as it possibly allow it. And then we can really, truly stop worrying about stuff.
Mm-hmm. And on that, we'll leave it there. Lorne Gunter, David Staples, thanks very much for your time.
Right.
That's it for Under the Dome. You can find all past episodes at edmontonjournal.com/underthedome, or you can hit that subscribe button on YouTube. I'm Dave Breakenridge. We'll see you next time.